Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I have with me today former High Commissioner of Pakistan to India, Mr. Abdul Basit. He is also currently the president of the Pakistan Institute for Conflict and Security Studies. Welcome to the print, sir, and this is the softcover edition that we have where we are going to launch your book. So thank you so much for speaking to the print.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Basu. What a pleasure to see you after how many years? I think 4 years now, but thank you very much for having me. I greatly appreciate.
So we'll first show the readers the book that is by HarperCollins. It's called Hostility, and that's quite a title for a book, A Diplomat's Diary on India-Pakistan Relations. So here is the book. It is by HarperCollins. So we'll dive straight into the questions. Interestingly, you have, at the very beginning, you've clarified that this is not a memoir. And this is not a book on India-Pakistan relations. There are several books on that. But this is about diary, your experience of your tenure here, right? And your tenure has been particularly interesting, if I can use a sort of a better word. But why focus only on that aspect? Because in your entire career as a diplomat, you've had several interesting stints, but you chose only this period, and that's what translated into the book. Can you shed some light on that and also this interesting title, Hostility?
Thank you very much. You very rightly pointed out, because originally my idea was to write a memoir on my entire service, 36 years of my service in the Foreign Service of Pakistan. But when I returned from India, I thought that if should I be writing a memoir that may take 4 or 5 years, or it will become a huge book which people may not like to read. So why not to focus on the main one of the main areas of Pakistan's foreign policy, because that is of interest to people, and we have seen ups and downs in this relationship, and it is more current, more relevant to what Pakistan and India have been going through since August 2019. So then I changed my mind, but in the introduction part of the book, I do give one paragraph each on my posting, as I start from Moscow. So, but the book is, as you very rightly said, is about my stint in New Delhi and how I look at Pakistan-India relations, how I conducted myself, and what were the issues from Jammu and Kashmir to terrorism. So I think people would be more interested in these issues rather than reading about my memoirs and the entire diplomatic service of 36 years. And as for the caption Hostility is concerned, I think this depicts what the relationship is between Pakistan and India. And then, as I also say in the introduction itself, that whereas I do cover about hostile relations between Pakistan and India, it is about also my own relationship with my people back home, which also in a way, in different ways, impacted my work in New Delhi. So I think that was the whole idea to come up with this caption, with this title.
Okay. If I can ask you, the first impression one gets after reading the book, and I've read the entire book. Thankfully, HarperCollins had shared it with us. But now it seems that this is like a tell-all book, right, on internal politics and sort of peer competition that goes on within the Foreign Ministry of Pakistan. And you very minutely give several details of some of the tensions that a diplomat faces, the challenges, and how things really don't go the way one desires, right? So don't you think some can accuse the book of being libelous, maybe within Pakistan, that, Mr. Basit is trying to settle the scores? What do you have to say to that?
No, this tussle goes in every organization, everywhere in the world, I would say. And Pakistan Foreign Office, or for that matter, Indian Ministry of External Affairs, are no exceptions. But I thought about it, whether or not to write, and I can tell you, it was kind of it was excruciating for me to pen down the whole the episode, how things really went kind of awry from my perspective. But I then kind of summoned the courage that somebody has to write, and these are hard facts, but there is no harm someone to point out these problems, because this was all done with the good intention of hoping that people, coming generations, would learn from our mistakes and would not repeat those which inevitably affect one's profession, one's work. So this was the intention. I do understand that some people may not like it, and that is natural. When you write something, it is not necessary that everybody would agree with you. There would be people who would appreciate. In my own service, my former colleagues, there are people who are very much appreciative what I have done, but there are also others who are taking pot shots at me. So that is something natural, and I was expecting that.
Mm-hmm.
But my intention was not to cast aspersions on anyone or to malign anyone. My intention is to pinpoint, to underline as to where the problems were, and how I was serving, in New Delhi on two different fronts. Though for the people of India, those things were not visible, but I was still trying to keep up my appearances, and I think I did succeed more or less. At least people did not come to know as to what was happening behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think that's the sign of a well-trained diplomat, which you really did well. But as you rightly said in your book, the period after 2008 Mumbai attacks, then the Sharm el-Sheikh incident, the joint statement, and then there was this progress on non-discriminatory market access, which was Pakistan's version of most favored nation. And there were this pruning of negative lists. Things were really looking up. Trade normalization was the key thing at that point of time. And I remember covering it almost every day, talking about, how this list will enhance the trade. And there were discussions also that, informal trade will not happen anymore. It will take a proper course. But in between, in 2014, you came in and you made, yes, for obvious reasons, Kashmir as the top priority. Did you not think for I do not know what was the strategy, but as you've written in the book, that somewhere the issue of Kashmir got compromised? My question to you will be, was it not a factor that let's build on the NDMA part, let's make trade normalization a normal process and let that flow smoothly, and then slowly come back to these tricky issues and contentious issues like Kashmir and other things? But your strategy was different, and why was that so?
No, my strategy was not different at all, because I was the person who strongly recommended to Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to come to New Delhi and attend Prime Minister-elect's inauguration. And he agreed to my suggestion, and he came. And we started building on that meeting, because that meeting itself went very well. For some unknown reasons, I was, since I was present in that meeting, our Prime Minister did not even mention the word Kashmir, in that meeting, despite the fact that Prime Minister Modi in that particular meeting kept on repeating about terrorism, about Mumbai attack fire, and so on and so forth. But our Prime Minister was kind of kept quiet and tried to keep the bilateral the meetings environment, overall environment, atmosphere conducive. So my approach was not different, but I must say that the book, if you go from cover to cover, it would give you a sense that there are three important things that I think one must understand. Whosoever is trying to dealing with this very complex relationship. First is that, and it is my viewpoint, and people can differ. First is that I have come to the conclusion that without settling the Jammu and Kashmir dispute, Pakistan and India perhaps can never have a normal relationship. The resolution of this dispute is a kind of sine qua non for having a normalization between our two countries. My second, assessment, or to say after having worked in India, I have come to this conclusion, my second conclusion, that the dialogue process which Pakistan and India we've had, under different rubrics, has kind of weakened Pakistan's position on Jammu and Kashmir, and instead of resolving the Kashmir issue, helped India to put Pakistan on the defensive both on Kashmir and on terrorism. And third, my third conclusion is from our side that we have perhaps not been able, wittingly or unwittingly, we have been able to concede too much to India in the process and weakened our position on these two issues, whereas we have had enough ammunition to counter India's narrative, but somehow we lost the ability to put things in their correct perspective. Now, Kashmir, as far as I am concerned, and I still strongly feel that no matter how much you try on the back channel or you have a structured dialogue process, my assessment is that we will always come back to square one. And this has been going on for years and years. So the time perhaps has come to try something different. CBM-based approach does work to a certain extent. But if that approach becomes an end in itself, then I'm afraid it doesn't work. And this is what really happened during my stay as well.
Mm-hmm. So the next question, of course, will come to the main issue that was always that grabbed the headlines under your tenure, is your meeting with the Hurriyat leaders. In your first tenure, in your first year, when you hosted the National Day reception, you invited all three Hurriyat leaders, 3-4 of them, all of them attended. And that's when the problem started to sort of, roll out. My question to you will be, why did you do this? And did you really think today when you write the book and you sort of introspect, did it achieve anything? Because we know what has happened to Kashmir. I'll come to that also since you've dealt with it. But what made you negotiate with the Hurriyat, considering that the Indian government told you that, okay, if you do not do that, we can go ahead with the foreign secretary level talks and other things. But you believe that was the right thing to do. Why?
Because, optics are also very important in diplomacy, and how you convey a message, how you deal with a particular situation. Tone and tenor, always very important. And I recall in my book, and it is a factual thing, whatever I have written, that the then Foreign Secretary Sujata Singh called me on the telephone to convey the message from the highest authorities from India. But as we were talking on the telephone, I could see, breaking news appearing on Indian channels that Pakistan High Commissioner has been told this, this, and this. So this was a kind of, public diplomacy. If you go public with such things, then obviously you do not leave space for your interlocutor to even consider your proposition. So I think the Indian side, if at all they had strong reservations, there were better ways to convey that to the Indian side rather than to threaten the Indian side that if you go ahead, we would cancel the foreign secretary's visit to Pakistan. So that, in my view, was not the way. And secondly, Ms. Basu, you should also remember that the Hurriyat leadership was also they were already sitting in the High Commission, because this message was conveyed to me at around 2:15, 2:30, and the meeting was scheduled for 3 p.m. So this whole episode, and with due respect, I would blame the Indian side for ramping up the issue, which Pakistan had been meeting with the Hurriyat leadership. And at times, Indian government has facilitated those meetings. So it was a kind of a shock for me personally. And I had no option but to go ahead with those meetings.
Mm-hmm. But even after that, also, you continue to meet them, knowing well that probably, and we know now that the Modi government had a different strategy and approach to the Kashmir policy and also to the India-Pakistan policy. So did you not think for once that, okay, let's just probably think out of the box, let's not discuss with the Hurriyat and let normal bilateral dialogue go through?
No, I think that was not the point for us to consider. If India at all had any problem, because India was kind of oscillating. It was like a pendulum from one side to another. Because the late Sushma Swaraj, even telling Indian journalists that after some time, I think after August or in the month of September, my Indian journalist friends would tell me that Sushma Swaraj had told them that they would have no objection now to the Hurriyat meeting, or the Pakistan High Commissioner or Pakistani officials meeting the Hurriyat leadership. So, but I think in 2014, the BJP's major concern was the elections in Jammu and Kashmir, Mission 44, so to say. So they kind of ratcheted up the entire thing on Kashmir so that to get some, seats in Jammu. So we could understand then. But in 2015, I met many times the Hurriyat leadership, but there was no objection from the Indian government side.
Mm. Yes, you talk about that how BJP sort of did that to make inroads into Jammu and Kashmir. Do you think that was the only reason why they were opposed to you discussing the Kashmir issue with the Hurriyat leaders? And today we know how the Hurriyat has also sort of fragmented. It's almost not existing, with all the senior leaders sort of stepping down. We only have Mirwais Umar Farooq. So do you think that was a wise step when you think about it today?
No, if I had not met, supposedly, what would have happened? Because revocation of Article 370 was then very much part of the BJP election manifesto as well. So I do not know how could my meetings or our insistence on a meeting when Sartaj Aziz, our national security advisor, was to visit New Delhi in August 2015 after the UFA meeting. Even that visit got cancelled because we insisted that since this has been going on for decades, we do not see Indian objection to that meeting reasonable. So even if we had not met the Hurriyat leadership, I don't think that things would have been different between Pakistan and India, because India wanted to make it a bone of contention for various reasons. First election in Jammu and Kashmir, then elections in Uttar Pradesh, and so on and so forth. Because it's a very convenient way of the Pakistan bashing and taking a hard stance on Kashmir pays off in local elections.
Mm-hmm. You also write in your book a line, when you talk about and you've chronicled every year as the chapters in the book, wherein you say in one of the chapters that former Commerce Minister Anand Sharma, he told you that, Pakistan should go ahead and grant the NDMA status to India in 2013-14 before the BJP came in. And the response from Pakistan was, let's wait for the election results to come out, because by that time it was clear that the BJP will be coming to power. And Anand Sharma called it a short-sighted step. Do you think somewhere down the line, and what is your thinking today, that had you granted the NDMA status and then the BJP came in, would they have, what situation do you think would have been different?
Well, I think under the given circumstances, we took the right decision because we were approached by the BJP and I was also kind
you
of
name that person who
made. I would not name that person because if he allows me to take the name, I would take it. But so far, he hasn't allowed me.
Maybe in the revised edition you can come up with.
Yes. So, I think at that point in time, that was the right thing to do, in my view, because in hindsight we can all get wiser. But at that point in time, as I was looking at the election after having met many people, doing my own assessment, homework, that who is going to win, who is going to form the government, then I recommended to my government that this is not the time just before the elections, Lok Sabha elections in India, that we grant this NDMA to India. Let's wait. It's just a matter of a couple of months. But we did not know as to how events would, take a turn after Modi Nawaz Sharif meeting in May, and then what happened in August. That I think put us all in a very difficult situation. But I think that was the right decision at that point in time, and that I do not really see as to how we could have done otherwise. I would tell Mr. Anand Sharma often that whenever he would meet me, privately before the election, so he would insist that this should be done forthwith. But I would, kind of try to keep him in good humor without saying that we are going ahead with this decision. But I could understand his viewpoint as well. But as a diplomat who was entrusted to explore possibilities of engaging with the new government, I thought it would be better to defer this decision for a couple of months.
Mm-hmm. But you also write, in your book that you were not really keen that Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif comes in for Prime Minister Modi's swearing in. And also, when after the meeting, and it was not a bilateral discussion, even the media, we were also told that this is just a side meeting that they're having. And he did not mention Kashmir. Now, taking all this into account, do you think that visit was not really probably the stepping stone, or not really, it did not really turn out to be the best episode in India-Pakistan relations?
No, I do not know how you get this impression that I was not in favor of that meeting. Actually, I strongly recommended to Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif to come and attend, despite opposition in Pakistan, because opposition parties in Pakistan were objecting to his visit. But I, as Pakistan High Commissioner, I thought it would be a good opportunity because, for me, I had just arrived in New Delhi in March, and this visit was to take place in May. So it was kind of godsend for me because, at very early stage of my tenure, if the two leaders would meet, it would open up many possibilities for the High Commissioner to then work on and build on that relationship. So I was for that visit. And that meeting, I can tell you, went very, very well because the two leaders also exchanged jokes. They exchanged, poetry, and I think they started. At the very first moment, they started liking each other, so to say. And I thought that the meeting, despite the fact that our Prime Minister refrained from mentioning Kashmir, and that was a kind of, I was not feeling very comfortable with that, but still I think it was a good meeting and we could have built on that, provided India had not thrown the monkey's wrench in August. The Foreign Secretary could have visited Pakistan as scheduled, and then we would have built on that. But unfortunately, that was not to happen.
But you also write in the book that post that meeting, you had to also go to Islamabad and you wanted to speak with Prime Minister Sharif exactly what was discussed. And you say that he was a little tight-lipped. And then you met the ISI chief and your former army chief. And they also, sort of alerted you on the Kashmir issue. Now, my question to you is, did you see a sort of different perspective when it came to the Prime Minister and when it came to the military? Because even then Prime Minister Nawaz Sharif told you, and you've mentioned that in the book, that he did not mention Kashmir because he wanted to do it at a later stage, maybe at the UNGA meeting. So
no, he did not tell me, because after the meetings with the delegations, the two leaders had a one-on-one meeting for about 15 to 20 minutes. So I was curious to know as to what was discussed between the two leaders. And immediately after the visit ended, my Prime Minister went back to Pakistan. He asked me to come to Pakistan. So I was in Pakistan and met him. I think I called on him on 2nd of June. So I wanted to ask him about as to what was discussed between you and Prime Minister Modi. But he did not, obviously, and it was his prerogative, I fully understand. He did not disclose much to me. And we did discuss so many other things, and and then he instructed me to see the leadership, at DGISI, as you mentioned, and I also mentioned in my book. But those were some other issues which he wanted me to discuss with them. So I went to them under his instructions. So my meeting, and I can tell you that the army did not have any problem, or so-called establishment did not have any issue with discussing, with having dialogue process with India or moving forward with India. At least during my tenure as Pakistan High Commissioner, not once did I come across any problem that whatever I recommend from Delhi was not accepted. Whenever I would come to Pakistan, we would have interministerial, interagency consultations, and things would kind of move smoothly. But the question was for me as to what does India have in mind? How does India? What is India's policy vis-a-vis Kashmir? How would they kind of engage with Pakistan? That was the whole question for me, because at the back of my mind I had Sharm el-Sheikh episode, and I did not want Pakistan to repeat that mistake, frankly speaking. So I was kind of preparing my people that whenever we have an opportunity to engage with India in a structured dialogue process, we need to correct some imbalance which was created in Sharm el-Sheikh.
You also say that, that Modi was not Vajpayee, right? And you were also opposed to back-channel diplomacy. Why is that, and how do you see the difference between Prime Minister Modi and former Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee? I want to understand from you.
Because, Vajpayee, we all know, he was a statesman in real sense of the word. Though I would still not agree with so many of his things, but I thought he would come across a well-meaning person. He would not engage himself in rhetoric which is beyond his stature. And he would always come across as an affable, person. And the fact of the matter is that since he came to Pakistan through Wagah, that in itself was a big initiative, and also visiting the Minar-e-Pakistan. So all these things kind of, conveyed a goodwill message from him. And then in the party itself, in the BJP itself, he had a stature which nobody could, could question. So even in India, he is regarded as a man who was of a different category. And it was also my impression, and that impression, whether one likes it or not, continues to this day.
Mhm. When you talk about the fact that Prime Minister Modi, and this is also post his so-called surprise visit to Pakistan, was my question to you will be, was that really a surprise visit? Was the Pakistan side not aware about it? And even then, how do you see that bonhomie finally turning into having no dialogue at all? And the fact that the government is still insistent when it comes to Pakistan, there is no dialogue, as you're aware, that terror and talks cannot go together. How did things deteriorate so?
That's why I'm now, in hindsight, perhaps I can now say that even then I was more careful, because I always thought that in hostility there is hardly any room for first any unilateral flexibility or going overboard, or going into overdrive, because it's a very difficult relationship. So we have to be very careful whatever step we take. And this casualness, about this relationship can generate hopes, unrealistic hopes, I would say. And at the same time, those hopes can fall flat in a jiffy. So hence, it is very important that instead of getting into these things, these casual approaches, one has to be very careful as to, Prime Minister Modi was welcome to Lahore, and it was a surprise for me, frankly speaking, because I was in Pakistan then, and I did not know that this visit was to take place. I was informed by my consular, my press consular from New Delhi. He called me that, sir, Prime Minister Modi would make a stopper. So it was a surprise for me. I do not know about others, but definitely for me.
Mhm. Now, coming to 2016, so you talk about the speech that Prime Minister Modi gave from the ramparts of Red Fort, where he mentioned Balochistan, and the fact that you were hugely upset of this. But had he not mentioned that, do you think things would have really been better, or why do you think Prime Minister Modi did that, according to you?
I think it was, we all know, August speech by Prime Minister Modi came after Burhan Wani's episode on 8 July 2016. And then the situation in Jammu and Kashmir, we all know what was happening there. And the Indian government was feeling the heat, feeling the pressure. And something had to be said like this. I do not know if even if he had not mentioned, things would not have really panned out differently in my view. And by mentioning that, he only reinforced what Pakistan had been saying all along, that there is interference in Balochistan. Defensive offense doctrine of Mr. Ajit Doval is in work. And there are efforts being made to target Balochistan, destabilize it through Afghanistan. So that, I think, was also not, it also reflected poorly on India, in my view.
But then by then, the Uri attacks had happened, the Pathankot event had happened.
Pathankot happened on 2nd Jan 2016. And then in March, we also arrested Commander Kulbhushan Jadhav, if you remember, the same year. And then the Burhan Wani episode. And then 15th August speech. So there were tensions are brewing up since Pathankot incident of 2nd Jan. Though in between, we did try to keep the atmosphere more or less, controlled, in a sense that our special investigation team visited New Delhi in March, April, and we kept kind of hopes alive that the two sides would be able to talk to each other sooner rather than later. But then Burhan Wani's martyrdom, then the things followed, did not provide much room for the two sides to engage with each other.
Mhm. But how do you see Prime Minister Modi raking up the Balochistan issue?
That was in bad taste, in my view, because we all know, after Kulbhushan Jadeh's arrest, there was no doubt left that there was involvement, there was funding, money was being funneled through, and we did not have any doubt. So it was, I do not know what really prompted Prime Minister Modi to say these things. And in that address, when he is, kind of celebrating the Independence Day of India. So that kind of, to me, if I was in his position, I would rather not do that because that does not tessellate with the spirit of that day, in my view. What was his intention? I would not know. Perhaps he wanted to build pressure on Pakistan. But that was neither here nor there, frankly speaking, because Balochistan was something which was already in the public knowledge that, and we were aware what was happening through Afghanistan.
Mm-hmm. But you seem to be also not quite happy with the UFA meeting that had happened. Why is that?
UFA meeting, obviously, but during when I was in New Delhi, nobody could see that I was not happy because I very strongly defended that statement. But obviously, I did convey my reservations to Islamabad then that this was not the statement I was expecting because I thought that not mentioning Jammu and Kashmir specifically was a huge diplomatic loss to Pakistan and to the Kashmir cause. So I was not very happy, obviously. But at that, when I was in New Delhi, I was defending the statement like anything, as any High Commissioner would do for that matter.
Mm-hmm. Now, if I can ask you, sir, what happened during that particular Heart of Asia meeting for which Sartaj Aziz came in, and there was a senior officials meeting. You wanted that he should come in, but did anything happen in that meeting which was significant? Because I remember Mr. Aziz was not allowed to really go around Amritsar as well. He wanted to visit the Golden Temple, which he could do quickly, but he was not allowed to speak to the media. How do you see that episode? Do you think that's when things started to deteriorate?
Because, first because there are many things which I have not written in this book. First of all, I was, Sartaj Aziz Saab to come for a day visit. The previous plan was that he would come for a day, would come in the morning and go back. That was the plan. Because we thought that since Sushma Swaraj Sahiba was all attending the Heart of Asia conference, and by then Sartaj Aziz Saab was not the National Security Advisor, we thought that it would be not appropriate for him to meet the National Security Advisor. So there was no point for a formal meeting between the two. And since Sushma Swaraj Sahiba was not attending the meeting, so there was no point of any meeting on the margins of the Heart of Asia conference. So there was no meeting. Yes, the two leaders, Sartaj Aziz and Ajit Doval, they did have a chat while they were walking back, to the parking lot after having dinner. They discussed, 5-10 minutes of walk together, and I was with them, and they just, kind of informally exchanged ideas as to how to move forward, but nothing substantive in that conversation.
Mm-hmm. Well, India has constantly stated that, it will negotiate or talk to Pakistan and let the SAARC process go through and, proper normalization of ties only if cross-border terrorism is stopped, right? However, in your book, you call Burhan Wani as, who was martyred. Now, do you think in this kind of a scenario, it will be very difficult for India to have discussions when the other side calls Burhan Wani, gives him a martyr status.
Not really, because we have our position, you have yours. You keep. I mean, if I ask you to please stop, this was a question I asked someone else the other day. That why doesn't India stop calling this this struggle as cross-border terrorism or terrorism for that matter? Why you call Burhan Wani a terrorist? If you stop calling them terrorists, then perhaps we would also consider something. But the question is, you are sticking to your narrative, which we think is flawed. It is misleading. The people of Jammu and Kashmir have been fighting for their right self-determination, and it is not something new. This struggle is going on for decades now. I mean, these things do not really matter a lot when it comes to when you get down to brass tacks. You get into serious discussions. Sometimes, if there is mutual desire to move on, to resolve problems, then these things do not really matter. You call who what. These things become peripheral, inconsequential in my view at the end of the day, provided you make up your mind to move forward. Unfortunately, that I still do not see as to how, because now, after 5th of August, decision by India, we are in a cul-de-sac and we do not know how to get out of this. And perhaps you may discuss it later.
Mm-hmm. How do you then see, towards the end of your tenure here, let's say 2017 onwards, did you really think that India and Pakistan can really resume the dialogue at some point? And now we are in 2021, both sides are still not talking, although we are seeing some initial easing of tensions. But how was 2017 according to you? Because, some of the steps that you had taken, and it also seemed from the Indian side that there was a disconnect between the foreign ministry and the military establishment in Pakistan. So how do you assess those years of yours?
There was no doubt, military tension. But as far as our relations with India are concerned, I can tell you from my own experience, I may be off the mark, but my own experience tells me that there has never been such a major divergence of views. There may be slight, some problems vis-a-vis approaches. Yes, that is possible. But even our establishment does want to have a normal relationship with India. Otherwise, President Pervez Musharraf would not have come with the idea of this 4-point formula, or he had not signed the 6th January 2004 statement with Prime Minister Vajpayee. So I think it's a misnomer, or perhaps the Indian side, and I am saying with some trepidation, that perhaps does not understand the dynamics of Pakistan, and then leads to flawed conclusions in my view. There is no question that our military or would impede any peace process, genuine peace process. But as I said in my initial remarks, India has used these dialogue processes to weaken Pakistan's position on Kashmir and to embroil us in peripheral issues. That obviously is neither acceptable to ordinary Pakistanis nor to anyone else. Because at the end of the CBMs, if there is some light, some hope that India would will be sitting across the table to resolve the issue once and for all, then we can kind of, have this CBMs based approach. But now, since Simla Agreement in 1972, now it is more than 50 years, Ms. Basu, and we are nowhere, and we do not know how to resolve this issue. So I have now, during my stint in India, I was definitely working for a structured dialogue, and even during my meetings with Ajit Doval, I would not be very forthcoming about the back channel diplomacy. But now, since 5th August 2019, I have kind of, my thinking has changed a bit. Now I strongly feel that it is the back channel which may be able to produce some results. And we do need results upfront on Jammu and Kashmir. If we again do the same thing and expect different results, that would be foolhardy on our part, I would say. So, hence, I am advising my own government as a retired foreign service person that we should be circumspect in our whatever we do vis-a-vis India and take every step with utmost caution.
Mhm. But India has already revoked the Article 370. It is not coming back. The Hurriyat is now sort of having an existential crisis. Now, in such a scenario, how do you view what can Pakistan do at this point of time? Just, apart from only raking up this issue everywhere.
I think it is for the people of Jammu and Kashmir first and foremost. It's not about Hurriyat or about any other organization. It is for the people of Jammu and Kashmir to decide if they are not if they are not agreeing to Indian occupation or the steps which India took on 5th of August. It doesn't really matter whether Pakistan agrees or not agrees. It is for the people of Jammu and Kashmir first and foremost. Secondly, I will tend to agree with you that revocation of Article 370 or 35A, it will be very difficult for any government to restore or rehabilitate those articles or amend the constitution again, though it was unconstitutional to begin with in the first instance, because Article 3 of your constitution does not allow the union government to bifurcate a state into two union territories. The only way, I think, one possibility could be that with some encouragement from the government, the Supreme Court of India declares those amendments unconstitutional, and that could pave the way for some talks, then some movement forward. Otherwise, other things can be done upfront. In my view, could be that Siachen is one example. If India is serious about resolving the Kashmir issue, then let's begin with first resolving the Siachen issue. That could be a good beginning, good step forward. Then release the Hurriyat leadership if you think they have become irrelevant. Why not to release them and allow them to travel wherever they want to go? Why not to demilitarize the urban areas in Jammu and Kashmir? Why not to revoke all the black laws, EXPA, PSA, DAA, and so on and so forth? So these are measures which would convey to Pakistan that this time round India is serious. But I would not recommend to my government to again engage with India on the front channel, and because here in Pakistan people are talking about the 19th SAARC summit and the possibility of a meeting between the two prime ministers. I know we have been here before. We have been moving from a stalemate to a stalemate. We would get together, again come up with a joint statement, another framework. So these things would take us nowhere, frankly speaking, because as I said, unless Jammu and Kashmir issue is resolved, we can never have mutual trust. And unless we have mutual trust, Mrs. Basu, we cannot have any regional cooperation, because regional cooperation cannot be built on unpredictable bilateral relations, on rickety bilateral relations. For a regional cooperation, it is important that at least two major countries in South Asia should be at least, at ease with each other. So this is what my assessment is. And I hope I am wrong, frankly speaking, because it pains me to see that we continue to, continue fighting with each other. We have not been able to resolve our issues, and it reflects poorly on the two countries, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Well, under you, the entire ICJ episode with Kulbhushan Jadhav had also happened, and you seem to be also upset on the fact that why he was given consular access the third time. Now, can you explain a little bit on that? You've dealt with it in the book, but I want you to discuss that.
No,
For our,
I think Kulbhushan Jadhav issue, we had not been able to uh, do our homework properly, in my view, frankly speaking. Kulbhushan Jadhav, his testimony, his confessions gave us everything. And I thought that there was no need to deny him the consular access in the first instance. And now, when we gave him the second time the consular access, the Indian side was not happy. And we immediately offered the third consular access. So I think we should have worked our homework with India, and we have already agreed on the protocols, on the procedures as to how the meeting would take place well in advance, in order to avoid these problems which came up after during the meeting and after the meeting. So I still believe that Commander Kulbhushan Jadhav's arrest, his trial, his conviction, there was no problem. But now the matter was taken by India to the ICJ. Now we are kind of, we are caught in a situation where we have to abide by the ruling or the judgment of the ICJ. Now it serves India's purpose as well to keep this issue alive. Hence, India is not cooperating, not appointing its consul as being asked by the Islamabad High Court. So India is also using dilatory tactics. It serves its purpose. So Pakistan, I think, is also not bothered too much. It's okay if it continues like this. But in my view, Pakistan should have made this issue a big issue, in the sense that we had all the evidence with us to show to the world that India is indeed trying to destabilize Pakistan.
Mhm. And also around the same time, Doklam had happened between India and China. You've written in your book that how you met both the Chinese and the Bhutanese ambassadors at that point of time. Now, what did you discuss? You stated in your book that you did not really discuss Doklam as such, but I'm sure that that was one of the.
I did discuss Doklam definitely with both the ambassadors. But I mean, all ambassadors do that. I wasn't the only ambassador who called on the Chinese ambassador or the Bhutanese ambassador. We all do that.
Poking Pakistan's nose in
So that was, I mean, I could not stop the media the way they interpreted, but it was my duty to get first-hand information as to what was happening in that area. So I wanted to have both views on both sides, both the Chinese ambassador and the Bhutanese ambassador. And that was my job. I was doing my job. And I do not know how in the first instance the media got, anything that I was meeting the Chinese and then the Bhutanese ambassador. But I think that was important from our perspective, because Bhutan, after all, having said and done, is a member of SAARC. So we do have a relationship with them, and we do care about them. And then we have a partnership with China. So we do want their relations to improve, frankly speaking.
So you went back to Pakistan in 2018 and
2017.
2017. So 2019 we saw Pulwama happening, then the Balakot airstrikes. Now, what are your views on those? I know what you've written in the book, but do you think we have gone to a point of no return now, these two countries?
No, in diplomacy, as Sushma Swaraj would always tell me, that we always leave the door ajar. So I would say that in diplomacy is the art of the possible. So I would not say that there is no room. There are always possibilities lurking around. But the question is how you approach them and how you move forward. But for that to happen, it is important that there is mutual desire to move forward. As I said, in hostility, you cannot keep on giving showing unilateral flexibility on issues. So it would hinge on both, I think most on India, because after the 5th August decision, India has had created more problems in the relationship. Now, it is now India's responsibility, I think, to see as to how we can get out of this, because it was not Pakistan which created a new situation. The new situation has been created by India. So now it is for India to see as to how it can get out of this blind alley, and the two sides can really this time round, rather than talking about CBMs all the time, visa, movies, cricketing ties, and so on and so forth, now address the real issues once and for all, so that we once and for all get out of this vicious circle, which has continued to bedevil this relationship for decades.
Mm-hmm. So my last question, I'll come to you, sir, is today, how do you see the relationship? We saw the DGMO's joint statement. There was some easing of tensions. Your army chief talked about burying the past. But then he also stated that Kashmir needs to be discussed. Now there are these reports that UAE probably is playing the role of a mediator. Do you sense some kind of thawing is happening of the tensions, or you think it won't happen unless, what India does on Jammu and Kashmir, but that chapter, as far as India is concerned, is sort of closed?
Well, that chapter is closed, and I do not see anything happening, frankly speaking, because I doubt that any government in Pakistan can be oblivious to the public opinion in Pakistan. And there is simply no question that any government would consider the Jammu and Kashmir chapter closed in Islamabad. It is simply impossible. If that is the attitude we still find in New Delhi, then I'm afraid there is no room to move forward. Hence, as I suggested in my book, that we should not be engaging. I mean, back channel diplomacy is okay. And I also suggested that a mutual friend can help the two countries. And I'm glad that the UAE, if at all, I'm not privy to details, but if the UAE is involved in encouraging both the countries, then it is good. My advice to my government would be that we should not be agreeing to any formal structured dialogue between the two foreign ministries or between the two foreign ministers unless details have been worked out on the back channel as to what India could give and how could we settle all our problems. Unless we have a clear roadmap, well defined on the back channel, it would be, I think, unwise on the part of Pakistan to yet again engage with India in an exercise which would again end up in no results. It would be an exercise in futility, in my view.
Mm-hmm. Well, on that note, Mr. Basit, I'm closing this soft cover session edition of the print. Once more, the book for the viewers. It's called Hostility, A Diplomat's Diary on India-Pakistan Relations. It is a fantastic book, a lot of revelations, a lot of issues get answered. One, whether agrees or not, it's up to the reader. But thank you so much for speaking to the print, and thank you for the soft cover. This book is by HarperCollins. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Been a pleasure talking to you. Thank you.